right? I love it. Good to see you guys. I missed the last 2 Sundays because I have been out of the country. I was on vacation, actually, getting to do something that I rarely get to do because I live in a desert that I love to do, and it's called freediving. And so I snuck away to some blue water and got to dive down really deep. One of the things that I love about it is that when you're doing that, you can't be anywhere other than where you are in your head, right? You can't, like, when you're freediving and you're diving down, you can't be thinking about, the problems you have or yet to fix back home. You don't think about your finances. You don't think about relational issues. Like, you don't think about any of those things. You think about holding your breath and staying alive in the water and all of those things. That's what you're very present and you're very centered. And so because of that, I just love it. And so that's what I got to do. I was gone the last 2 Sundays, and then I got to come back, and I found myself thinking, man, I went on an adventure. I had a vacation. I got to just be really present and disconnected from so many things. And I feel refreshed and ready to go. I feel really good. I was walking into the office on Monday of this week where you're just kind of like, hey, high-fiving people. And they're like, we didn't have your experience. Nice to have you back. Like that kind of a thing. That moment, and that's okay. And it was just like, wow, this is great. All right, this is going to be a great season. And then that night, I got to spend some time with one of my daughters, and I took her out for ice cream, and she ordered a flavor, I ordered a flavor. She looks at me and she goes, man, hey, I really want to try that one. Can I try it? And I said, sure. So I shared with her, and she said, thanks, and it was great. And then the next morning, she woke up, and she was really, really sick and had to miss school. And I suddenly was just like, oh, that's a bummer. She felt really, really terrible. And then later that night, I got home from work, and I go to grab a glass of water that I'd been drinking out of in the morning, and since I'd been home from work, and she looks at me and she goes, I've been drinking out of that one. And I looked at her and I was like, why? The worst question as a parent, right? Isn't that the one where you're just like, why did I? I'm like, why? And she goes, because I was thirsty. And I was like, okay, well, that was an honest answer. And then I looked at her and I said, hey, when you decided that you wanted to try my ice cream last night, were you sick then? And she said, oh, I just had a really bad sore throat. It wasn't nearly as bad as today. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I just thought, I can't dodge saliva. I am going to get sick. And I looked at her and I said, I have to teach a men's breakfast on Saturday. I'm going to teach on Sunday morning. I think I'm going to be sick. And she said, yeah, I'm really sorry about that. And that was it. And then Wednesday morning, I woke up and I felt terrible, and I was suddenly sick, and I just found myself thinking, isn't that how life goes? And I don't say this to be complaining or fatalistic or anything like that. I just feel like life has this strange way at times where you're just like, man, this is going really good, and everything seems really great, and I'm centered, and this is going to be a great season, and then you're sick the next moment, or something happens where you're like, this is easier, this is kind of a sweet season, and then difficulty lands at your doorstep. And oftentimes we look and we go, how do I figure out how to hack my life so that I'm always good and this never happens? That's why on Wednesday morning, do you know what I did? I immediately started making rules about drinking cups and sharing ice cream and all of these things in my house. I did. My whole family's like, you're sick. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. That's kind of how that goes. But we do. We want to fix that. But the reality is, difficulty is a normal part of our life, isn't it? Everybody who lives a life, just by nature of being a human being and having a real life, you have good moments and you have hard moments. It's just a part of it. And you don't dodge it, you walk through it. It's kind of how life is. Anybody who's lived long enough, if I asked you to list all of them, you couldn't. You've forgotten many of those moments and many of those things, and you have some that are still yet to come because it's part of being a human being. If you face difficulty in your life, welcome to the human race, and it is good to join in a real life alongside with you. And that's so much of what this series has been about is just trying to normalize the fact that, okay, we face difficulty. It's a real thing that is normal, not abnormal for us at times. I know sometimes it can feel like too much, and sometimes it can feel like it's too frequent, but it is normal to walk through difficulty. And so if it's a normal part of life, what do we do with that? How do we face that? And what does it mean to be a person of faith who walks through it? And I know that Glenn has been talking with you the last 2 weeks when I've been gone about, okay, these are some different examples of what that looks like and what that means. And so I get to close this series out today and address this idea of difficulty, and I want to do it in maybe a different way. And here's what I'd love to talk about today, and I'll just be really straightforward with you. I want to talk about the moments when we face difficulty in our real lives because we're normal human beings, and we actually need to walk through it. It's ours to walk through, and yet we find ourselves looking, going, I don't want to do that. right? It's the moment when and this happens to all of us, when you find yourself in your life and something difficult comes along and it feels big or it feels daunting or confusing or all of the things that can be there, and you know that, and maybe you've even are just getting a sense from God where you're like, yeah, this is part of my story right now, and this is mine to walk through, and yet part of you just looks at that whole thing and you're like, but I just don't want to, and so I want to avoid it. And I want to take steps back from it. In fact, if it's in that room, I'm going to close the door. I'm going to shove the door shut to the room that I'm in. And I'm just going to live my life in this room. I'm never going to leave it again. But you know that it's actually maybe something that's yours to walk through that we face in our life. I want to talk about those situations. And here's why I think what we're going to talk about here today is important. Because when we live our lives where there's moments of difficulty that are ours to actually step into, but we end up hiding from them, or we end up avoiding them, or we end up running from them, we start to shrink our lives, and we start to shrink ourselves, where all of a sudden our lives become about that avoidance, and our lives, we literally will just be, I'm going to live in this room, I'm never leaving it, like whatever's out there gets to stay out there, I don't want to deal with this. And can I just ask you, because I think you already know this in your head and in your heart, are you meant to spend the rest of your life living in a room of avoidance? No. God created you and gave you life so that you could have life and have it to the full. Life is a precious gift meant to be fully lived, and it will include difficulty. But don't let difficulty rob you of life, right? It's a part of life, but don't let it rob you of life. Don't let it shrink your life. And so to talk about this together, what I want to do is I want to look at two things that often we encounter in the midst of difficult situations, and they want to keep us from stepping into that. But the truth is we can actually rise to that occasion, so that we don't shrink our lives and we get to keep stepping forward into our lives, trusting God to lead our stories and discover what he has for us. So if you're facing anything like that right now, I hope this morning is encouragement to you. If you're not facing anything like this right now, the good thing about being a human being is at some point you will, right? That's just part of what this deal is. And so I hope that in those moments, this equips us and helps give us some encouragement and some gumption to actually step into those things, friends. And that would be my hope for this morning. So we're going to journey through this. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Joshua chapter 2. And when we get to Joshua chapter 2, we're introduced to this character named Rahab. And that's really who we're going to be looking at this morning, is this biblical character named Rahab. I love this story. If you don't know anything about Rahab, Rahab is this person that is minding her own business, really, like just living her life. And then the next thing you know, this extraordinary moment of difficulty shows up on her doorstep. It literally is in her house. And then tensions start to rise around her, and she has a very difficult decision to make. And if you were Rahab, you'd look at the decision and the moments and the things that she has to make, and you would go, I don't want to do that. You just would. We'd shut the door and be like, I'm going to live in my house. I'm not leaving. Like, no. I'm hiding from this. We'd find ourselves pulling back because she'd be a human being just like us in those moments, and yet she doesn't. She steps into the difficulty that's actually hers to walk through, and she steps into the larger story that God is telling that's in front of her. And in the end, it becomes something absolutely extraordinary. And here's why. You know what's amazing? If I didn't talk to you at all about Rahab today, and we're going to go to an Old Testament passage in the book of Joshua, and if I just never spoke about the Old Testament, and all we did was turn to the New Testament, you would still get to know Rahab. And you know why? Because in the very first book of the Bible, in the very first chapter, or very first book of the New Testament, in the very first chapter of Matthew, we read the genealogy of Jesus, and the author's really particular about saying this is the line that Jesus came through because he wants us to see the progression of God's story through time, through significant people, and all that it meant and all that it held. And do you know who's listed in that? Rahab. And do you think in the story that we're going to read that Rahab knew that that was going to happen? That she knew that part of her story would be woven into the larger story to impact not just her life, not just her family's life, but the world at large from the significant moments and things that she stepped into? There's no way she did, and yet it did. We get to know that because we live on this side of the story, and so God uses her in this really beautiful way, and I hope we find some courage from her story along the way here too. And so that's what we're going to look at this point in the biblical narrative. So hopefully you've turned to Joshua. If not, you can follow along on the screen. At this point in the biblical narrative, when we get to Joshua, we've moved through what's called the Exodus story for the most part. So if you're unfamiliar with that, you know the story of Moses, essentially where God goes and says, Moses, I want you to go to Egypt and say, let my people go. And Moses does that and liberates the slave labor workforce of Egypt. About 1 million people, they flee Egypt and they go out into the desert. They escape all of this and they live in the desert for 40 years. which is a really long time. I don't know if you've looked around Tucson and been like, I could live out there for about 40 years. Like, it's a long time. And I actually think we live in a pretty lush desert compared to most, as far as that goes. And so they've been out there, they've been doing this, but they've been in the desert because it took them that long to become a people. It took them that long to stop being the slave labor workforce of Egypt and to stop being like the Egyptians and to start anchoring themselves in their identities and who they are and to be the people of God. And they finally find themselves standing at the foot of the promised land because that's what they've been journeying towards. There's this land that God's promised to them and we're going to make our way into this and there's this blessing and all this stuff. And so they get to the promised land, which you can imagine being excited after 40 years, and you look into it and there's already people living there. This is during a time in history when nomadic tribes were moving around and warring and competing so that they could settle. And if you could settle first in an area, you could build a city or a town. And if you could build that town, you could fortify it. And then you'd have a defense to protect yourself. And you'd have advantages. And that was what was already there. There was a city called Jericho that was a big one. And it was protected and all of these things. And the Israelites are going, how are we supposed to go live in this land when it's already occupied and the people are already there and they're fortified and it's a city and we don't know what to do? And they're scared. And so they send in a couple of spies, and this is where we encounter Rahab. Joshua chapter 2, 1-2. It says, and Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. And they went and they came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. So here's the beginning of a very tense situation. I want you to imagine you're minding your own business. And the next thing you know, you realize you're harboring spies of a foreign nation inside of your own house. That's a problem for you. And then when you realize that, you suddenly realize, and the king already knows about it, knows it's at my house. And now I've got this moment where what do I do with the people in my house? And what's going to happen with the king? Like this has escalated very quickly for Rahab. And she's suddenly faced with the decision of how do I proceed forward? And what do I do here? Right? This is our very first introduction to Rahab. Introductions in the Old Testament matter. When you're reading through Hebrew narrative, which means like a section where it's Hebrew storytelling, not poetry, not wisdom literature in your Bible, but really it's Hebrew narrative. When you're reading through Hebrew narrative and you encounter someone for the very first time, what's said about them matters. Because part of Hebrew culture even, in terms of how the Bible would get read or how scriptures would get understood or stories would get remembered, is later on when that name gets brought up again or when something else happens again, you remember back to the first moment because it becomes a marker for you that anchors that story. And so it matters. If you've never thought about this, think about Abraham. Really, really big character in the scriptures in the nation of Israel, right? Israel. And think of what we are told when we very first encounter. The very first thing we're told about Abraham is that he's married and that they're unable to have any children. It's the very first thing we're told about Abraham. And you go, well, why? Because central to the story of Abraham throughout his entire story is going to be God saying, I want to bless you and use you to multiply. Like your offspring will become a blessing to the whole world. So there's something about having children that's central. And the second piece is, and Abraham's going to become this great model of faith. And so the very first thing we're told is that he can't do that, this thing that's central, and that he's going to have to trust this larger piece. And we keep remembering back to that because it's a central piece to how his story unfolds. Think of Joseph in the Bible. And I don't mean in the New Testament, Jesus' father. Think of the guy with the coat of many colors, right? The Technicolor dream coat, however you experienced or encountered Joseph in life for the first time. Joseph, the very first thing we're told about him is that he was favored by his father above his brothers. That's like the very first quality that we get to hear about Joseph is that he's favored by his father above his brothers. Why is that significant? Well, when you start to read the story of Joseph, which spans chapters of the book of Genesis, you see this unfolding story again and again of moments where Joseph goes through hard things but finds favor in the sight of whoever he's with and finds favor in the sight of the Lord. And the most commonly said and written phrase in that whole text is, and God was with Joseph because he has favor. It is actually a story of catastrophe and favor over and over and over again. It's central to the story. See, in Hebrew, the way you're introduced matters. So this is the very first time, you guys, that we get to be introduced to Rahab. And what are we told about her? We just read it. We're only told 2 things. We're told her name, and we are told that she was a prostitute. And you go, okay, cool, what else? That's it. That is the only thing that you're told. In a time, in a culture where what the narrator chooses to put right here matters. And there's a part of this where we get to recognize Rahab had a reputation. And it's important for us to understand that or to know that. Rahab had a reputation. That's part of why we don't get to learn all the other details and things. We just know that that was her name and that she was a prostitute. That's her reputation. You want to know what's really interesting about all of this? If I were to take you through the whole story really quickly right now, which we'll work through most of it or part of it here today, but if I were to take you through the whole story and you get to see how this thing ends, you know what you're not going to do? If I go, so who is Rahab? You're not going to go, well, she was a prostitute. That's probably not what you're going to say. By the time you get to the end of the story, what you realize is that she is a person who actually overcomes her reputation, that she's actually a person who, despite all of this, steps into extraordinary moments, trusts the story of God, puts herself at risk in a way, but saves her family, saves a people, and paves the way forward for what God was doing in that era and time to unfold. And she becomes a great hero of the nation of Israel. She becomes somebody who's held with honor out of this. And you know that when you get to the end of the story, but we don't start our stories at the end, do we? We start them at the beginning, and we find our way through them that way, right? And in the beginning, what we come to realize is that Rahab had a reputation. And this is the first thing that I want to point to this morning, that thing that can make you shy away from difficulty, keep you stuck sometimes. Reputation can make us want to hide from difficulty. This is the first one. Reputation can be one of those things that in the face of it, when you're struggling with it, it can make us want to hide from the difficulty that's actually ours to step into. Think about it. What if Rahab had said to herself, man, I see this, and there's this moment where these people in my house, and the king is here. By the way, she chooses to protect them. She chooses to make that difficult situation, and it's because she believes and has faith in God and believes he's telling a story through this, and she wants to be a part of it. But what if Rahab had said to herself, man, I'm not doing anything with this. These people are never going to care for me because they know my reputation. What if she'd said that? What if that had been the message that had been rolling through her head? What if Rahab had said, because of what I've done and because of how everybody knows who I am, I can't be different than what I am. No one will accept that, so why bother trying? What if Rahab had gotten to a space in that where she said, what if nobody takes me seriously because I can't rise above my reputation? What if I'm disqualified? What if I'm the wrong person because of this? What if this thing is destined to haunt me and I can't escape whatever this thing is? And so this is just how it's going to be. This is just what I'm going to be. And so, you know what I'm going to do? I'm faced with this really difficult decision right now. I'm going to go hide in my bedroom. I'm just going to live there. If I can't escape it, I may as well live in that room. Do you know what I mean? I may as well get out of here. Lock myself away. She could have done all of those things. And you're not going through her situation, but maybe some of that resonates with you. Maybe you've asked yourself some of those questions. Maybe you found yourself at moments in your own life where you're staring into the mirror and the reputation that comes back to you. And it doesn't always have to be negative. Sometimes it just feels like a label you can't get rid of that keeps you stuck in a place. And maybe you know what that's like. Because those moments, you can see that man, there's a difficulty that's in front of me. You might even go, I think God wants me to step into this. And you can still find yourself going, but I don't know. I'm just going to leave the door shut. We'll keep that on my doorstep. I'll live in this room. When I was 18 years old, and I've shared this with you guys before, I was an intern here at Casas in the youth ministry, and I wasn't a very good one. I've also shared that with you. I wasn't. I did some good things, but at large, I was kind of a mess. I had keys to every building in the church and the gates at 18 years old. I did. I could open any building at any point in time and open campus up whenever I wanted to. They should never have given me that, at that point in time, but I did. And so here's what I would do. There would be some times where it'd be the middle of the night, I'd be hanging out with friends, and I'd be like, hey, let's just go open up Casas. And I'd turn on the youth building and assemble all the speakers and things, and I'd set up speaker systems and blast music at midnight around here. And then I would invite people, and we would play indoor soccer inside of the buildings. There was a moment, you guys, where I had a group of people playing indoor soccer in the Ironwood, and I kicked a ball so hard that it stuck into the wall and didn't fall back out. It just left a hole with the ball stuck in it. And I just stared at it going, how am I supposed to tell the youth pastor about this tomorrow? Those types of moments. And some of you are looking and you're like, and who paid for that? And how did this work? And those weren't questions I was asking during that period of time. I just was doing things. Do you know what I mean? That's where I was. And so I was pretty irresponsible. And I was kind of a mess as a leader at that moment. There was one day I was driving to a youth team meeting and that I was scheduled to be at with, everyone who works in youth ministry to just work, get started for the week. And I was a little late and I was driving really fast into campus and all of a sudden police lights flick on behind me. And I'm getting pulled over and they pulled me over in front of the church building, right here. And I'm like literally getting pulled over by the police officer for speeding, rightfully so, in front of the church building. And he comes walking over and he says, can I see proof of registration, license and registration? I said, well, here's my license. I don't have proof of registration. My registration's super expired. And he goes, yeah, I saw that on your sticker back there. He goes, can I at least see your proof of insurance? And I said, yeah, let me find it. And I couldn't find it. I was like, I actually don't have any proof of insurance either. And he goes, so you don't have proof of registration and you don't have proof of insurance right now? And I said, no, which should have been, get out of the car, you can't have this anymore. Do you know, like that's how that goes. And I was speeding. This is not a good moment. And for whatever reason, I have no idea why, this particular police officer, he just was like, you know what? Don't quit being an idiot. That's basically what he told me. He's like, quit being an idiot. And I need you to take responsibility. And I need you to get all of this fixed. And I swear, if I see you do this a single more, like this is going to be way worse for you. And he showed mercy in that moment and let me off with a warning. And so I came running in really late to the youth ministry meeting. And I barged in and I interrupted everybody. I was like, you guys wouldn't believe it. I just got pulled over and I didn't even have my insurance. I didn't even have my registration. And all I got was a warning. And Phil Lynn, he was the youth pastor at the time, he said, Ryan, come with me. And he just got up out of the meeting and walked. And I was like, uh-oh. And we walked into his office. And he was so angry at me. He was so mad at me. And he goes, Ryan, we made you an intern. You agreed to be an intern. And the reason that you're doing this is because you ultimately said you wanted to help participate in leading students. And so you need to be building a reputation with parents where they would actually trust you with the well-being and the responsibility of their kids. But ultimately, the only story that you're creating, the only reputation that you're creating right now is that you're irresponsible and can't be trusted. And what are you going to do about that? And that became this moment for me that it suddenly hit me where I was like, oh my gosh, I think I have a reputation that I can't escape right now. And I think this thing is something that's, I'm wearing this. I have this. This is how people see me. And I realized it. 2 weeks later, I came into the offices and Phil said, hey, I want to have a meeting with you. And I walked in and Phil was in there. And another youth pastor named Jack Scholl, who was also kind of my boss at that time, was in there. And they essentially looked at me and said, Ryan, sit down. I said, okay. And they go, so this isn't going really well. And we got a phone call from a church over the mountains in Picture Rocks, and they need an interim youth pastor. And we think that maybe just this place isn't the right place for you and that you need to go. And it was a really awkward, really necessary, but really difficult conversation where I suddenly realized, oh, my reputation is something that I can't get out of. I can't rise above it right now. I'm stuck with this. In fact, this is ending my internship. All right? The hardest part about having a reputation is that sometimes you feel like you can't get past it. You ever have that moment in your life? So I left because I was like, well, I think this is over officially, and it was. And I said, okay, I'm supposed to go talk to this other pastor, but I looked at myself in the mirror, and I just found myself thinking, I have a reputation for being irresponsible and for being a mess, and if this is who I am right now, I don't think I should go have that conversation, so I just need to call him and tell him no, because I can't live past this. I can't rise above this. I'm stuck beneath it, and I'm just going to live there. I'm going to close the door, hide myself away, because I don't want another awkward, difficult moment like the one I just walked through that I'm going to create. And that was what I geared up to do. And I went to E.G.'s at Ina and Thornydale to have lunch with this pastor. His name was Bob. And I'm sitting with Bob, and I've prepared myself in the car. You're going to go in, you're going to say no, this is how it's going to go. And gearing myself up. And I walked in. I never got a chance. Bob just started talking, and he's like a good old boy from Oklahoma who tells all kinds of stories and started telling me about his past and the church and all of these things and families and all of these moments and stuff that were there. And I just kept being like, how do I interrupt him so that I can say, no, I think you've probably heard about me and I'm not the right person for this. I can't do this, Bob. Thank you for considering. No. And I couldn't do it. So finally I excused myself to go to the bathroom. And I stood in E.G.'s at Ina and Thornydale, standing in front of a bathroom mirror, essentially having a pep talk with myself about, you're going to walk out there and you're going to say no, and here's your good reasons, and here's what you're going to do, and that's how it's going to happen. And I walk back out and I go, so Bob, and then he goes, so tonight, or this week, essentially what I'd love to do is I just would love to have you come on a Wednesday night, and we have a Bible study that I lead there, but you'll get to meet and I'll invite some of the students, you'll get to see the church, I'll give you a tour, maybe meet some of the students, and we could just talk more from there. So I'd love to see you on Wednesday night. And I opened my mouth to say no, and instead I said, that sounds great, I'll see you there. And that was it. And Bob shook my hand and he walked out. And I just was like, what happened sitting in my car like that? That's not what was supposed to, I was supposed to shut the door. I was supposed to move away because Because sometimes you just don't rise above your reputation. It rises above, you live with it, and you get stuck under it. What am I doing? And it just got stuck in the midst of what I continued to be a difficult moment. Guys, maybe you know what that's like. Some of you right now are facing moments in your life that are difficult. And by the way, they don't have to be bad moments and hardship moments. Sometimes they can be good moments. Sometimes they can be necessary moments, but they're just difficult. They're complicated. You don't know what you need to do, or you've got doubts, or you feel like your reputation's getting in the way. And if that's you right now, maybe you're one of those people that's going, but I'm actually having a hard time with reputation. Because when you look in the mirror and you see yourself, you struggle to see past whatever label you've either put on yourself or somebody else has put on you. And you're staring at that thing and you find yourself going, well, why bother rising above it? If this is how I'm known, if this is who I am, it just is. I don't know what to do with that. And so you find yourself shrinking back. You find yourself confining to that one room. And your life's starting to shrink. You know, maybe for you, there's a moment that you're facing, and it's a really hard moment, and it hurts, and you're sad. And the honest truth is that it's kind of broken your heart a little bit, and you're torn up, and you actually need to cry a little bit or just express this out. But your reputation, and sometimes this can be seen as positive, but your reputation is, I never break, and I never show weakness. And everybody knows that, and I know that, so I can't. And so you don't. And instead, you just keep hiding from it, but it feels like life starts to shrink, and you get a little smaller, and you get a little smaller. Maybe there's a moment at work, and you see something you care about, or there's an opportunity or something, and you're like, man, I want to be considered for that, or I want to help with that, or I want to partner on that, or I want to be on that team. And then you just recognize, but no one sees me as the person who, they all see me in this box. They all see me with this label. They all see me as this way. And I feel stuck in that reputation. And I know I should have a conversation. In fact, maybe I even feel like God's leading me to be like, hey, risk the difficult thing. Step into that moment. And I should do that. But you're just looking and you're going, but if they're just going to see me this way anyway, what's the point? If I'm not going to get considered anyway because I live in this box with this label, with this reputation, why bother trying? And you start to shrink back, and life gets a little smaller and things get a little harder. Sometimes, you know, if I were to sit down with any of us in our families, if you sat down with me and my family, you'd suddenly look and we'd all go, oh, we all play roles. And you'd be like, you're the funny one, and you're the problem child, and you're the strict one, and you're the this one, and I don't know, whatever labels we want to give ourselves, I don't know, but we all kind of have these things. Have you ever found a moment where there's something difficult in your family? Or some opportunity that you want to step into, something there, and you find yourself going, but if I do, no one's going to take me seriously because I'm the goofball. If I do, nobody's going to believe it because I'm the one who always blows stuff up or messes stuff up. If I do, everyone's going to not listen to me because I'm like the strict one and they don't want to partner. If I do, and then we just shrink back from the moment that's actually ours to step into because sometimes it feels like you can't rise above the reputation and it can get really difficult. We start to shy away. See, reputation is essentially when you're looking in that mirror and you're looking back at yourself and what is it that you see. And if that's you, friends, if you're struggling with this, I love the story of Rahab. I love it for this because that's not a great introduction in chapter 2 for Rahab, is it? Most of you guys are like, you know, if I ever made it into like a piece of scripture, what I would love is my name and that I was a prostitute. That's the only things I want people to know. Right? That's not usually the reputation that you're going, these are the only things that I want is, you know, is here with me in this. What I love about Rahab, she has a reputation. She has a story, but she knows that her story is not over. And I want you to know this same thing. If you find yourself in a place where you're stuck here and you're going, but I can't move past that. I'm not minimizing how you feel. I'm not minimizing what you've walked through. The reality is you probably see what you see because there's moments that have happened in your past that have led you to see it and hold it right now. You probably had moments where people have ascribed that to you or you've ascribed that to yourself. You've made decisions along the way or things have happened along the way. This is the story you have been telling. But that's all that is. That is the story that you have been telling. And what we get to see from Rahab is that she's now standing in the midst of her story right here and right now, and she knows she's still holding a pen and that the God of the universe is with her and that she gets to write the next chapter. And what she doesn't know is that she's going to show up in Matthew chapter 1 in the lineage of Jesus and be this amazing human being who actually impacts more than just her own life, her family's life in the world. She has no idea. She's sitting there holding a pen, essentially in a difficult situation, facing a reputation and deciding who she wants to be now and what story she wants to tell. And friends, I just want to tell you, your story's not over. Your story's not done. Whatever reputation you hold, and I know some of us might be like, I don't think you know. I think it's actually bigger. It might be as big as it gets. It's just not bigger than God's story. And you ultimately get to make a moment where you decide, yeah, this might be true and this might be where I've been, but I get to partner with the God of the universe and decide what chapter do I want to write with God as he leads me, as I write myself into his story, as he writes me into his story. What are the moments in front of me that are mine to face, that I can step into? And I'm not saying it's easy, but you won't find yourself shrinking away. And I love that Rahab models this. She actually chooses in that moment to go, I think God is doing something important. I believe in him. And so you know what? I'm going to harbor these spies, even if it means standing up to the king, even if it means facing my reputation, even if it means I step into the difficulty in front of me right now. And she does. It's a really big moment. Joshua chapter 2, verse 3-7. It says, Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman, that's Rahab, had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. And I do not know where the men went, so pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she actually brought them up to the roof, hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men who were after them, they pursued after them on the way to Jordan as far as the fords, and the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. That's the decision Rahab makes. Now, if you're just going, well, good for her, that's awesome. Put yourself in her scenario for a moment, you guys. Think about it for just 2 seconds. I want you to imagine that yesterday was going awesome. And you're just like, yeah, this is my life like it was yesterday and the day before. And now today, like I said, you find out that you have 2 foreign spies in your house. The king of the land knows about it. He sends soldiers to your door with an edict that he knows they're in there. Release them or else. Bring them out, bring them to him or else. How many of you have ever been in a situation like that? I haven't. I'd be losing my mind. I'd be like, there is no good situation. There is no good, like, this is horrible. I'm so scared. This is bigger than I ever thought it could be. This is intimidating. This brings us to the second one. Sometimes intimidation can make us want to hide from difficulty, right? Sometimes the thing that keeps us from stepping into the difficulty that's actually ours to step in is we just look at it and it feels too big. We look at what it is and it feels like this is too much. See, reputation, it's what you see when you look at you. It's when you look at that mirror and it's the label you see that you've put on yourself or that somebody else has put on you. Difficulty isn't you looking, it's when you look around, or intimidation, it's when you look around you and you go, but have you seen how big that is? Have you seen how difficult that is? Have you seen how complicated this is? Have you looked at this? That's when we find ourselves intimidated. And friends, intimidation can make you shy away. It can make you go, I'll do it tomorrow. Actually, never, maybe not. Right? You can just, it's because it's big, it feels overwhelming, but Rahab doesn't shy away. Isn't that remarkable? She doesn't shy away. In the face of this particular moment, she chooses to be a part of the larger story that God is telling. She chooses to change the story that she has been telling and to move through that. And she actually hides these spies. And in doing so, I'll kind of tell you a little bit. She ends up making a deal with them to protect her family and spares them, and then she becomes a part of the nation of Israel. And her section of scripture actually ends by saying, and she is still with them even to this day, meaning she finds a new community, a new group of people, that champion and celebrate who she is, and she ends up in the genealogy in Matthew as part of the lineage of where Jesus even comes from and what his story looks like, right? She chooses to rise above intimidation. I remember showing up to the church in Picture Rocks on that first Wednesday night when I had agreed to come. And I sat in the car before I went in, prepping myself of like, here's how to say no to this, and here's what to do here. And so I was like, all right, gave myself the pep talk, looking in the rearview mirror. I don't know why we do, maybe I'm the only one here. I'm like talking to myself in the rearview mirror like a crazy person in the parking lot of a church. And then finally I'm like, okay, I got this. And I go inside because I'm going to tell the senior pastor, Bob, that I can't do this. I can't be an interim youth pastor. It's too much. I'm too irresponsible. I'm not going to be able to make this happen. And I walk in, and they had a Bible study there on Wednesday, but before they did Bible study, they would all have fried chicken dinner together, and they'd sit and they'd hang out, and then eventually they'd break for Bible study, and the youth would go do a thing and that kind of thing. And so I didn't know that. I walked in at the end of dinner, and I'm like, so Bob, and I'm like, I'm just going to get this out of the way. And he goes, why don't you grab a seat and have some food? And I was like, okay. And the next thing I know, I'm eating fried chicken, and I'm talking with people in the church and sitting around, and everybody seems pretty nice, like they seem pretty good, and I'm just going like, man, when do I tell these people? Now I have to tell these people no, and these people no. Like, this is getting more complicated as this goes. And eventually Bob goes, well, I think it's about time to get started. But Ryan, let me give you a walk around the church, and I'll walk you over to the youth building, and I'll introduce you to some of the students that we invited tonight just to come meet you, and you can meet them. And that'll be great. And I said, okay, cool. I'd love to walk around your church and see this. And so I got a quick tour of the church, and then we walked into where the youth building was, and I opened the door, and I suddenly realized that I was greeted by 15 sets of eyes that were sitting in a circle in the youth building. And all these teenagers that had come there. And I was like, oh my goodness, they're all meeting me. And I started to meet them, and I learned their names, and they learned my name. Guys, 2 of them were a year older than me. 1 of them had a full beard. I still can't grow a beard. I literally was like, how am I supposed to be an interim youth pastor for my dad in the corner? Like, what am I gonna do? I was so intimidated. I just wanted to crawl away and hide. I did. It just, that seemed like a lot. One of them, as an introduction, was like, look what I can do. And he started doing shoulder press push-ups on the ground. And I was like, is this a flex move? I'm already intimidated by whatever's happening here. Like, what do you do? And Bob introduces me to all of them, and I get in, and they get to meet me. And then Bob says, okay, I'm going to go lead the Bible study over on Wednesday, and Ryan's going to actually walk you guys through youth group tonight. And he turned and he walked out of the youth building. And I'm standing there in the middle of the youth building looking at 15 sets of eyes staring back at me, who I just learned their name, they just learned my name, and he's got a beard. And I'm trying to figure out what to do. And Bob's gone. I was just supposed to get a tour. I was trying to tell him no the whole time. And I'm so overwhelmed. And I just looked and I said, so what did Bob tell you would happen tonight? And one of the students said, well, he said that you'd teach some things or talk about the Bible a little bit, and then maybe we play some games and have a youth group tonight. And I was like, did he? Okay, cool, Bob. Yeah, that's what Bob said. Okay. You know when you keep saying okay so long, people are like, you're not okay. You know that moment? Okay. And then I just looked and I was like, what am I supposed to teach? I didn't even bring a Bible. I thought I was on a tour to say no. And so I just said, does anybody have a Bible? Embarrassing moment number 1. And then somebody goes, yeah. And they go grab a dusty old Bible off of a shelf in the corner, and they hand me a Bible. And I did what no responsible teacher of the Bible should ever do with a group of people. I held the Bible, I prayed to God really quickly and just said, Lord, whatever I need to do, please make it happen. I let the Bible fall open, I closed my eyes, and I pointed at a word. I just started reading. And then I was like, what do you guys think about that? Let's talk about it. Let's engage in a discussion. And we did. And then I made up a game, and we went outside, and we had a lot of fun together. And then one of the students at the very end looks at me and he goes, so are you going to be back on Sunday? This really meant a lot. And I was like, going to say no. And then I said, absolutely, I'll see you on Sunday. And I was there for 2 years. And that's literally how I got into ministry. Literally. Well, I mean, you guys should be a little more cautious than that, because I just told you that 2 weeks before that, right? And I was there for 2 years. I was still super intimidated when I left. I felt better and also still just overwhelmed, because this is life. There's these big moments. There's these difficult moments. But what I will say is that began a journey of me stepping into something that anchored me into really caring about individuals in a very honest way. Not just trying to grow up in a place, which I'm so grateful for here, but actually stepping into a place to love and to lead and to take some responsibility that was bigger than me. And it changed my life. It was a really big moment for me, and I'm so grateful, but I almost didn't. I tried so hard to just close the door and live in a small room that ultimately was just based on my intimidation, based on my reputation, based on those things. And maybe you know what this is like. Maybe for you, there's something that God has put in front of you right now. And it might be a difficult moment, it might be a beautiful moment. Either way, it's kind of complicated. And you're finding yourself looking at that and you're going, I think this is part of what's mine to step into, but I'm intimidated, it feels too big. I'm intimidated, it feels too complicated. I'm intimidated, it feels too messy. It feels too much. Maybe there's something that God's put in front of you and you're just like, I know, I feel that, but I also am just gonna shut that door, shrink back, keep talking to myself in the car. And life starts to get really small. You're not meant to live talking to yourself in a rearview mirror in a car. You look crazy in a parking lot like me when you do that. Maybe you're looking at a dynamic in your family or your marriage with your kids. And you know there's something in there that you need to step into that's hard. And it's uncomfortable. And you don't want to. Because you don't know what to do. And it just feels like it's really big. Sometimes we look at those moments and we find ourselves saying things like, that's been going on for so long, it's unchangeable, it's just fixed, it's just how it is, I can't do anything with that. And so we just keep getting smaller and smaller in those relationships with our family, sometimes with our loved ones, and we keep shrinking down. And you feel that in your life because it's there, but you're intimidated by it. Maybe you feel a little like Rahab, where you're just facing a moment and you're like, I have never had the king's soldiers at my door. I have never had any of this. I'm going to shut the door and lock the doors and move back, like move into the upstairs. Like I'm getting as far away from all of this as possible because I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. But deep down you know that your life isn't meant to be housed in a room called avoidance. And that your life isn't meant to be housed in a room called running. But that ultimately there's a story that is your life that gets to partner with God and move forward. And even here, even now, he still has something for you. So to help us with this, I want to share with you something that Rahab says and does, because she tells us where she finds her courage. She tells us where she finds her audacity to rise above reputation and to rise above intimidation. And it's found in Joshua chapter 2, verse 9, beginning at verse 9. Rahab, speaking to the spies, says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, as soon as we heard of the bigness of God, as soon as we heard of how powerful God is, our hearts melted. And there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord, and here's the moment, if you tuned out, here's the honest truth of what she says and what she knows. Here's her reason for why she steps into the difficulty before us. She says, for the Lord your God, and not just their God, but your God, friends. The Lord your God, our God. For the Lord our God, he is God in the heavens above. He is as big as it gets. He's the God of the entire universe. He is the all-powerful being who holds it all together. And on the earth beneath, and he's square in power and where we live our lives, right anchored right here and right now. He is as big as it could possibly be and as present and with as he could possibly be. He is in it all. We are never outside of the reach of his hand. Rahab ultimately looks and says, this thing in front of me is bigger than I am, but it's not bigger than him. Because what happens with us when we find ourselves struggling with intimidation and wanting to shrink back in our lives, it's because we spend too much of our life staring at that one thing and it becomes the only thing we see. And all of a sudden the problem just gets bigger and it gets bigger and it gets bigger because it just feels like I can't overcome that and that's too big for me. And sometimes it is. I'm not trying to minimize those moments. Sometimes it is too big for us. But something happens when you just for a moment stop looking ahead at that problem and fixating on it and you look at who's with you. And you look behind you at who's been in your story, through your story, and in you. And you start to realize just how big and how powerful and how vast God really is. And you start to realize that this is a difficult moment, but that you follow a God who has been moving through moments like this from the beginning of time to the end of time, telling his story in powerful ways through every person he relates with, every person he partners with. And that all of that is with you. And so you get to look back forward again and you get to go, it's still a big problem and I am still so intimidated. But it's not that big. And it's not that you're minimizing it. You're finally wrapping your head and your heart around what's really with you and around who God really is, because it is a big deal. And sometimes those are ours to step into because of the story God wants to tell through us. And I am so grateful that Rahab does that. You know, God knows your name the same way he knows Rahab's. God knows your story the same way he knew her story. God's moving in the midst of your life. It's not done. It's not confined to a room, just like hers. So, in closing, friends, we'll all face difficulty in our lives because that's part of life. It's just part of what it is. Sometimes it'll be beautiful moments. Sometimes it'll be hard moments, but difficulty is just a part of life. And maybe you're somebody in here where you're going, the thing that's really struck me today is that reputation piece, and I struggle with that. And my challenge for you is to see yourself right here and right now, not as a closed book, but as somebody holding the pen, ready to partner with God as you move into the next chapter. And I just want to ask you, that's been your story. So now what do you want to write with him? And what's he want to write with you? And what if you gave yourself permission? And what if you made the choice, I want to rise above reputation because I believe there's something important in the difficulty that is mine to step into? And this is my second service forgetting the thing I was supposed to bring out right now. I wanted to show you guys my ordination certificate. And not just to show it off, it's a weird looking certificate. I wanted to show it with you too because of what it was, what happened. 2 years after I was at that church out in Picture Rocks, the pastor came to me and said, Ryan, it's been a big deal that you've been here, and I was getting ready to go off to Bible school, and he said, before you go to Bible school, I really want to affirm what I see in you, and there's others that want to do that too, and we would like to ordain you into the ministry. And it was a really big moment for me. It really was. It was really special. You get to invite your loved ones and friends, and other pastors came who actually saw this in you, and they got to speak on your behalf, and then they would sign a thing, and they all signed. Everyone who came there on that day that was ordained in ministry signed my ordination certificate. And what's particularly special to me, and it's why I wanted to show you, is in the bottom right-hand corner, there are 2 signatures on that certificate that mean the world to me. One is Phil Lynn, and the other is Jack Scholl. It makes me emotional to talk about. And I need you to recognize those are the 2 people I sat with in an office who looked at me and said, the story you've built for yourself, the reputation you hold is that you're irresponsible. And these are the same 2 people who stood with me 2 years later to say, we see what God is doing in you. We see the story that he's telling through you, and we want to affirm that. And I wanted to share that with you all just to encourage you. You can, in fact, rise above your reputation. You're holding the pen. What story do you want to tell as you move into the difficulty that's in front of you? And lastly, you might be a person in here who feels like, but the thing in front of me feels too big or too intimidating. And I just want to challenge you to remind yourself of the words of Rahab and put them where you can see them. Think about this in the weeks and months to come as you face these moments and these things. For the Lord your God, he is God in heavens above and on the earth beneath. May you remember in the midst of your story, not just how big the problem is, but who's with you, who goes before you, who comes behind you, so that you might find the courage and the gumption to know that you are loved by the all-powerful God of the universe. He looks upon you with favor. He wields his story in you and through you, and he has things in this life that are for you because you were meant to have life and have it to the full. May we rise to the occasion that is our lives.